code reading. Sweet, I'll start off. So on line 12, we have an opening tag for the div element with a class attribute being assigned a string. On line 13, there's another opening tag for the div element with a class attribute being assigned a string. Line 14, there's a self-closing image tag with the source attribute and alt attributes both being assigned strings. Closing div tag on line 15. On line 16, opening tag for the button element with a class attribute being assigned a string, some text content, and a closing button tag. And then on line 17, a closing div tag. Caroline, could you do 18 through 21?
Okay, on line 18, there's an opening tag for the div element with a class attribute followed by a string value. On line 19, there's a opening div tag for the div element with a class attribute followed by a string value. On line 20, there's the opening self-closing image tag with the source attribute and an alt attribute. And on line 21, there's a closing div tag.
Thank you. Opening button tag on line 22 with the class attribute being assigned a string, text content, and then a closing button tag. On line 23, a closing div tag. Rukaya, could you do 24 through 27?
On line 24, there's an opening tag for the development with a class attribute that has a value of a string. On line 25, there's an opening tag for the development with a class attribute that has a value of a string. On line 26, there's an opening self-closing image tag with the SRC property that has a value of a string and an alt attribute that has, did I say property? SRC property or attribute? Yeah, SRC attribute that is a value of a string and an alt attribute that is a value of a string. On line 27, there's a closing div tag.
Perfect, thank you. Yep, and then just another button as well, and that'll wrap up the HTML. The CSS, Trey, could you read lines 1 through 3, please?
Yeah, so we have new CSS rule set for the select all. I'm sorry, how would you say the universal selector?
Yeah, the universal selector.
With the opening curly brace on line 2, we have the property box sizing being assigned the value of border box, and on line 3, the closing curly brace.
Awesome. Noah, 5 through 9.
There's a new CSS rule set. Body on line 5. Line 6 is the property margin 0. On line 7, property font family with the value sensor. Line 8, background color property with a certain specific color, and closing, and line 9, closing curly braces.
Awesome. Caroline, 11 through 13.
Okay, on line 11, we have a new CSS style rule set section with an opening curly brace. On line 12, there's the max width property with the value of 992 pixels. On line 13, there's the margin property with 2rem auto value.
Perfect. Line 14, the display property has a value of flex. Line 15, the justify content property has a value of space evenly. Closing curly brace on 16. Rukaya, 18 through 21.
On line 18, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the class custom button, followed by the opening curly brace. On line 19, the padding property has a value of 0.5 rem and 1.5 rem. On line 20, there's a border property with a value of none. On line 21, there's a border radius property with a value of 0.25 rem.
Perfect, thank you. Trey, could you do 22 through 24?
On line 22, we have the font size property being assigned the value of 1 rem. On line 23, we have the color property being assigned the color white. And on line 24, we have the background color property being assigned the color blue.
Perfect. Line 25, the cursor property is being assigned pointer. Line 26, the transition property is being assigned all 0.5 seconds ease. And 27 is the closing curly brace. Noah, could you do 29 through 32?
There's a line 29, new CSS rule set. There's of the class custom button. With the pseudo class hover. On line 30, it's a background color property with the value red. Line 31, transform property with the value rotate 3 degrees. And line 32 is a closing curly braces.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah.
Question here. So is it so in order for transform to work, it has to be there somewhere a transition?
No, the transition just makes it happen smoothly, but you can still transform without a transition.
Because on the file by default, there's a transform scale 1. So when you open index, try to hover over the button. It stays the same, doesn't get
Yeah,
bigger.
because scale was 1. Like when we said in the HTML, where we set the initial scale to 1.0 in that meta viewport tag, the default scale of something's 1. So you'd have to give something higher than 1 to be able to see a difference. 1.1.
The button is gonna get bigger, like
Yes, if you were to increase the scale. Yeah. Caroline, could you do 34 through 36?
On line 34, there's a new CSS style rule set selecting the class card wrapper with an opening curly brace. On line 35, there's the text align property with the value of center. On line 36, there's a closing curly brace.
Rukaya, 38 through 42.
On line 38, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the class card with the opening curly brace. On line 39, the max width property has a value of 18 rem. On line 40, padding, the property padding has the value of 0.5 rem. On line 41, the margin bottom property has a value of 2 rem. On line 42, the border property has a value of 1 pixel, solid with an RGB value.
Perfect, thank you. Trey, 43 through 47.
On line 43, we have the border radius property with a value of 0.25 rem. On line 44, we have the background color property with the value of white. On line 45, we have the cursor property with the value of pointer. On line 46, we have the transform property with the value of scale 1. And on line 47, we have the transition property with the value of transform in 0.5 seconds ease.
Perfect, yep. Line 50, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the class card with the pseudo class hover, opening curly brace. Line 51, the transform property has a value of scale 1.1, closing curly brace on 52. On line 54, there's a new CSS rule set selecting all image elements that are a direct child of an element with the class card, opening curly brace for the declaration block. Line 55, the width property has a value of 100%. And then on line 56 is the closing curly brace. Take a look at the quiz questions real quick, and then we'll take a look at the page and we'll see what's happening. Noah, could you tell me the transition property is shorthand for which 4 CSS properties?
There's a transition property. The name of the property that's gonna be affected by the change. There's a delay.
Yeah.
When, like after when's gonna happen after a millisecond. The timing function.
Timing function.
Behavior of the transition. And there's a last one there.
How long do you want the transition to take? So the transition duration.
Transition duration.
Yeah, so these are the 4 things. We have the transition property, which will indicate which CSS properties will be transitioned. We'll have the transition duration, which means how long do I want that transition to take. We'll have the transition timing function, which dictates how the animation occurs throughout that duration. And then we have a delay, which would add a delay before the transition actually started. Trey.
I noticed on the MDN docs, it also had the behavior. Is that something completely different?
Look at the transition on MDN. Transition behavior. let's see what they do. Allow discrete normal transitions will not be started on the element for discrete animated properties, whereas an allow discrete transitions will be started on the element for discrete animated properties. Baseline 2024. So this seems like it's a brand new thing that got added in August of 2024. So I wouldn't know what it does off of the, oh, I see. Okay, so this is actually really handy. Thank you for showing me about this because I'm going to use this all the time now. One of the problems with transitions is that you cannot transition something from not appearing to appearing. So if I give something display none and then I give it display block, I cannot transition that smoothly. Either it appears or it doesn't appear. So I think what this is allowing us to do with the allow discrete is it's allowing me to actually change the display to say, I want you to display over 0.25 seconds or whatnot. So the element doesn't just appear or disappear and it'll like slowly appear or slowly disappear. So I think transition behavior is specifically if you were going to be transitioning a property that indicates whether it would be kind of appearing or not. So like the opacity and display, that's indicating whether the elements will be visible or not. So I would say it is different. I haven't used it yet. I'll try it after this because I'm very excited now. But I think it's only to transition that the appearing and not appearing. Rukaya?
So I want to know that in like a shorthand, the order matters, right?
Yes, the order does matter. So you need to make sure that you write it in the order of this. So the first thing will always be the property. The second argument will always be the duration. The third one will always be the timing function, and then same thing with the delay. But in theory, you can also not use some of them, I believe. So for instance, like if I only give it 2 values, then I'm only talking about the property name and the duration. If I give it 3 values, then the second one would be the duration and the third one would be the delay. So it's kind of like the padding and the margin shorthands, where depending on how many arguments you use it with, it kind of dictates or changes depending on which one it's referring to. If you were to do them all 4 individually, then you'd be talking about each 4 individually. But depending on how many arguments you actually use or not, then you'll be doing them individually. Timing function. All timing function does is it dictates how the transition occurs over the duration. So linear means that the transition stays the same for the whole duration. So the speed at which that transition occurs is the same. Ease in means the transition is going to ease in at the start and then it's going to pick up speed. So if I switch to ease in and I hover, you can see it started slow and then it got faster as it got closer and closer. So that's all the timing function it's doing, is it's dictating how fast that transition occurs throughout your duration. So if I say something's going to have a duration of 2 seconds, do I want the transition to be the same for the 2 seconds? Or do I want it to start slow and then go fast? Or do I want it to start fast and then go slow? So that's all the timing function's doing, is it's dictating the speed at which I want that transition to happen. Yeah.
Just question here. So the transition. I noticed that because in the assignment says apply the transition on the card div. So
Yes.
So the transition is only applied on the container that holding the image. But why we did not use transition on the image? Can we use it on image?
We're not changing anything on the image.
Because
If I were to increase the scale of the image, then I could use transition to change it. You only use transition when you are going to be changing a property into 2 different values, and you want those values to change smoothly. So I have a button. When that button is hovered, I'm changing the background color and I'm changing the rotation. So I want the background color and the rotation to change smoothly. So that's why I gave this a transition. If I didn't want it to change smoothly, then I wouldn't give it a transition.
but it's usually applied on the container.
It's applied on the base selector, not the selector that has the pseudo class. So the base selector.
But the thing is, I'm trying like, well, why, so we can apply transition on image, but it's not necessary to.
If you're changing something on the image. So like if by default, the image is just the image, but when I hover over the image, maybe you want to change the scale of the image. Then I would give the image a transition scale to say I want that to take 1 second. But if I don't ever change anything on the image, then I have nothing to do transition.
But the thing is, the image is inside another container, which is div. Right, because.
Yes, I'm scaling the whole div. But I'm changing something. It's not staying the same. So I'm changing it. So I'm transitioning the change.
So this is why I'm asking you, it's better to change the container.
No. It has nothing to do with the parent or the child. Does an element's styles change? Yes. Do you want that change to happen smoothly? Then give the base selector a transition.
So it doesn't affect the flow of this is why it's saying it doesn't affect the flow of the HTML, like.
What do you mean the flow of the HTML?
Like if you change something in the image, if you want to like increase the size, it's not gonna affect the.
No,
vision.
well, I'm changing it only when it's being hovered. So it's only when I'm hovering it, it's bigger. As soon as I move my cursor back, it goes back to the default size. So it's not like I'm using positioning to like move it around.
Yeah,
It's just, no, it's just only when I do that action.
So if the div is with the width of 300, for example, and if I try to put the scale on the image, I want to be bigger than the div width. Is this the fix gonna happen?
I don't understand what you're asking. Like the image is in the div.
Yeah, the
So-
image is in the div, right? So for
It's just you can change anything, whatever you want, whether it's an image, it's a button, it's a paragraph text. All you need to do is you need to change your properties values. Do you want the color to go from red to green? Do you want the color to like whatever? If you change a properties value at some point and you want a time to occur, then you give it a transition. That's it. Does not matter if it's a parent, does not matter if it's a child, does not matter. Does an element's styles ever change? Yes. Do you want that change to occur smoothly? Give it a transition.
Oh, okay. Even the div size is kind of small.
All you're saying is, what do I want to transition? The transform. So if the transform ever changes on my card, I want that to take 0.5 seconds. That's all this is saying. So now, since I changed the transform here, it will take 0.5 seconds. But I only ever give a transition if I'm going to be changing a certain CSS properties value, and I want that change to take a certain amount of time.
So you can use the transform and transition too.
Any CSS, I don't know about any CSS property. Most CSS properties.
Yeah, I forgot that transform is a property too.
Rakai.
So I have two questions. The first one is ease in out would be like it would ease in and then it would like again like be slow, like it would start slow and end slow, right?
Ease in out. Yeah, I think yes, it would ease in and it would also ease out. So it would ease in, get fast in the middle, and then it would also ease out on the end. So it gets slow towards the end.
Okay. And my second question was, so here in the custom button rule set, we've given it like a transition all and then like 0.5 seconds, right?
Yep.
So now this is being applied to all the properties or whatever properties can take transition only in the custom button rule set, right? Like the rotate will not have that transition because
It would, because I'm saying transition all properties. So any properties whose values change to what they were here is going to be transition. So since custom button did not have a default transform, and now I'm giving it one, it's all will account for that, and that transform will take 0.5 seconds.
Okay, so here, what was it? Yeah, in the card rule set, we have given a transform scale 1.
Yep.
But then when we hover it, it changes to 1.1, right? So
Yep.
why did we give that 1 in the card rule set? On line 46. I mean, if you don't give it, it would still work, right?
In this case, it would still work. Yeah, I'm just making the cards bigger by default.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so I'm just giving them like a starting scale just to make the cards bigger on the page by default, and then I'm just increasing it here. So in this case, I'm not changing scale, I'm just changing the rotate. So by default, I want the rotate to be 0 degrees, which is the default. So I don't need to set it, which is why I didn't give this a starting transform rotate. But in this case, I wanted to give it a starting scale of 1.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, if you had already given it like a width and a height to make it bigger, then you wouldn't transform it.
In this case, I still would transform it because transform only gets
No,
added.
I mean on line 46. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like on line 46, you wouldn't add that. I mean, if it was already bigger with like the width and the height.
You're saying if I didn't have a transform?
Yeah.
I would still add it because the transform is still changing. There was no transform property. Now there is a transform property. So now I'm transitioning that.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm sorry. I was talking about the transform scale 1 that you had given. You said you gave it because you wanted to be bigger, like by default, like originally.
Oh, okay. So let's open this up. Okay, so let's look at my cards. So if I add the scale 1 back, save it. Why is my file not saving? There we go. I don't know if the scale 1 is actually even really so card. So if I click it off, it's not actually doing anything. So if I don't give it a transform, you see the transition still occurring. Let me increase it just so that we can test it. So the transition, let's have this take 5 seconds. So you can see, even though I didn't give card a transform by default, it's still being transitioned.
Yeah,
because I'm adding the property, so the property is changing.
Yeah, I got that. I was only wondering, why did you give transform in the card rule set, the transform scale 1?
I don't know, honestly. I didn't build this one. I'm not sure why they added it, but it's really not needed.
Yeah, because even when I took it off, it was still working. So that is exactly why I was wondering that what's the point of it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's kind of what I was saying, whereas like scale 1 is technically the default, which is why I'm not sure why it's really even needed, because like I'm essentially saying be the default of what the scale is anyway. So I don't know. I'm not sure why they added it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I think we still had actually one other quiz question, so let's answer that real quick. All right, we had 2 more actually. Ray, can you tell me, what does the transform property do?
It allows you to modify the visual appearance of how the element appears on a web page.
Yeah, so it allows me to modify the visual appearance of where an element appears on the web page. So if I wanted to rotate it or I wanted to skew it, I can use transform to help that. And then Rukaya, can you give me 4 examples of transform functions?
Rotate, scale, skew, and translate.
Yeah, so rotate, skew, translate. There's a few other ones. I think you have like translate X, translate Y, depending on if you only want to translate one of the axes. But yeah, there's a few options for sure. Main thing I wanted to talk about with this one is that notes about why the transitions need to be applied to the base selector rather than the one with the pseudo class. So if we take a look at our button, we can see our button has a transition all 0.5 seconds ease. It has a starting color of white and a background color of blue. As soon as I hover over it, let me add the hover thing so that way we can see these styles. Then I change the background color to red. and then the transform rotates it 3 degrees. So we can see right now, the transition is on the custom button selector. Well, let's move it. So let's move it so that now it's on the selector with hover. And let me increase the time that it takes. So now our transition is going to take 5 seconds. So now watch what's going to happen. These. I put my cursor over the button. It's taking 5 seconds to change its styles because the transition's 5 seconds, right? So now the background color and the rotate has happened. Watch what happens as soon as I move my cursor. It jumps. It takes 5 seconds to occur. As soon as I move my cursor, it jumps back and it didn't transition back. This is why we cannot apply the transition to the pseudo class, because by applying it here, transition will only get applied once it's being hovered. So now that I'm hovering over the button, the transition exists. So it's able to do the transition. But when I move my cursor, the button's no longer being hovered. So it's no longer being applied that transition property, which is why the transition property needs to be on the base selector so that it always has the transition property being applied. So that way, if I am hovering or if I'm not hovering, it will still see that transition property. So now when I put my cursor on it, and now when I move it back, then we can see it's taking 5 seconds to go back. So just an important thing to keep in mind with the transitions, you need to make sure that you always put your transition on the base selector and not the ones that have the pseudo class. So that way you're transitioning both states and you're not only transitioning the one state. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I don't know why my transition is not doing anything. It's kind of,
You're probably using it incorrectly.
so what I did, because the transform scale 1, then I added transition transform in 2 seconds. So
But do you ever change the transform scale?
oh yeah, it's gonna stay the same.
Any other questions about transitions, transforms? Trey.
This may be a little off topic, but I noticed when you change the timing to the 5.5 seconds, will we ever have to enter the color transition, or will it just automatically go through the color scale?
Well, I'm telling it what colors to switch to. So I'm saying when you're being hovered, do background color red. And then this has a background color blue. So it already knows what colors to switch from.
Okay, but so during the transition, it actually changed from red to purple to blue. So I guess what I'm asking is, will we ever have to tell it what colors to transform in between, or does it just do it automatically?
It would do it automatically. You could. So there's keyframes. So you could create a keyframe animation. And if you were to do keyframes, you could have percents. So you could say, oh, at 0% of my transition, apply this. At 30% of my transition, apply this, and on and on and on. So if you wanted it to show certain colors between those two, you could create a keyframe, and then you could do it that way. So you could say at 30% background color is whatever the background color is. At 70% background color is whatever the background color is. So if you wanted to create that manually, you could. Other than that, the browser will already figure out this is my starting color, this is my end color, and it'll already transition between them seamless for us.
Nice. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Rukai?
So in the document, it says that we can modify, with the transform property, we can modify the appearance and position of an element without disrupting the normal flow of the document.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to understand is, for example, there was no margin, there was no padding between these two divs, these two elements, the images, for example, and we were scaling it. So what this means is that it wouldn't push the other elements. I mean, how?
Yeah, it's saying, if you remember from the positioning exercise, you remember when I gave an element position absolute, and then all of the elements underneath it like moves up to fill in the available space. So when I adjust the transform, what it's saying is it doesn't remove it from the document flow. So the elements are still aware that it exists. So it's not going to try to fill in the available space. It still knows that it's taking up that space.
Okay,
Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question here. So,
Uh-huh.
so when it says, a transition in half a second, is this gonna be happening after once? Is it the delay or the
No,
duration?
this is the duration.
The duration.
So this is, I'm saying this transition will take 5.5 seconds. If I did this, now I'm gonna say after 1 second, do a duration that takes 5.5 seconds.
And we need to put the delay always after the ease, right? Like after the function.
It depends on how many arguments you give it.
So if you only have two arguments, or for example.
If you only have 2 arguments, then this is always gonna be the duration.
The duration, okay,
If you had 3 arguments though, like I could do this.
yeah.
And I could just do that, and this would still be the delay, and this would still be the duration.
Mhm.
And I'm just using whatever the default timing function is. But if I do this 4 individually like this, you see I had 1 second, add a delay. So let's do it longer, so that way we can see it. So I'm setting my delay to 5 seconds, and then I only want the duration to take 0.5 seconds. And now when we go back, I hover, nothing's happening for 5 seconds. And then in 0.5 seconds, the duration.
And
I move it back, it's waiting 5 seconds before it starts the transition. And then it'll do the transition in 0.5 seconds.
another question, so for the scale, or when we change it to scale 1.1 and we put in transition, so it's gonna happen? Do you need to hover over, but I'm
Yeah.
hovering over, but nothing happened.
Then you're not changing the scale.
Yeah, I changed it to scale 1.1, so
Mhm.
when I hover over the,
It should work.
yeah, it's not working.
Okay, well, we'll take a look later. After Rukaya?
After you have tried the transition behavior property, will you show it to us in action?
Oh, yeah. The display none and the opacity one. Yeah, I'll mess around with it after this. I'll show you. So we could do it. So let's just say I had a. I'll show you the problem right now, where P, some text, and then let's give this a class of some text. Oh, well, I guess, let me think about transition all 0.5 seconds. And then, so by default, it should be showing, but now I need to add some JavaScript to hide it.
Yeah.
So let's do. Okay, so I just added an event listener to my button, so that when I click the button, then I'll set the display to the some text to none. And I'm trying to transition, we'll say display for 10 seconds. You can see that when I click, so my text is right here. I click, and you can see it immediately goes up. So right now, without that new property that we haven't tried yet, displays and like visibility cannot be transitioned. So I cannot like slowly hide and show something to the DOM. But hopefully now after that new property that you guys showed me, that that could be done. But this is the current problem, and so hopefully that thing fixes it.
Okay, can I see the TypeScript file, how you did the event listener? Uh-huh. Mhm. So you can apply style and display.
You shouldn't have. You shouldn't. This is bad practice. I just did this to show a quick example. This is doing inline styling, which you never want to do because it has the highest level of specificity besides important. So you never want to apply styles via inline styling. I just did it to show that quick example. Any other questions about transitions or transforms? All right, so let me stop the recording.